Hi, everyone. We're here today. We are streaming about the plane info box. That is the box that appears when you click on an aircraft on the left-hand side of the screen, and it pulls up all sorts of information about that particular flight. So what we wanted to do today was break down all of the information on the left-hand side of the screen so that you can see what you're getting, what the information is, where it comes from, and what that information can either tell you or cannot tell you about a particular flight. So we're going to go from top to bottom, run through the entire thing. Some of this information is available for all of our users. Things like the aircraft image and the rankings and things like that. And then you also have all of the information about the altitude, ground speed, data sources, and things like that are available with some of our subscription packages. So we're going to run through all of everything in the plane info box and see what's available, where it's available, and where it's coming from. So as we can go to the top of the screen. Oh, and if you have any questions, we have the chat. So leave your comments in the chat and we'll be happy to answer those as well. So starting at the top, at the very, very top of the plane info bar is the flight number and the call sign. So the flight number is the IATA flight number. It is the flight number that you see on your tickets. It's the flight number that you see everywhere on the information boards within the airport and things like that. It's what airlines use to sell the tickets. The other information over here, this QTR 66Y, is the call sign that's coming directly from the aircraft. The flight number does not come from the aircraft. The flight number comes from the matching that we do with the call sign. So the aircraft is broadcasting the call sign, and from there, we match that via our schedules that we receive from airlines and schedule providers. We match that call sign to the flight number so that we can display the flight number and we can display information like the route. We'll get to that in just a minute. So right below the flight number and the call sign, we have the aircraft airline, the airline operating the aircraft. For certain aircraft, we have an operated by field as well, because the airline is being flown. The airline is different than the airline that is flying is different than the airline that it is flying for. You'll often see this for charter airlines and things like that, where they're operating specifically for one airline, but it's an aircraft being operated by a different airline. In this case, everything is being operated by Qatar Airways. It's a Qatar Airways flight. It's a Qatar Airways aircraft. And as you can see, it is an A380 because we have a picture of the aircraft for nearly all commercial aircraft. And as we continue to build up the jet photos library, you are seeing more and more aircraft photos for the for smaller aircraft like private aircraft and things like that. So in our sibling site, Jet Photos, you can take a photo of an aircraft and upload that to Jet Photos. And all of the photos are screened to make sure that they meet certain requirements and criteria, and you can view all that on Jet Photos. And then once they're approved, they are sent over to kind of the Jet Photos catalog. We pull the latest photo of a registration from the Jet Photos catalog. Sometimes you'll see a photo that isn't necessarily of that particular aircraft. For instance, most recently, a newly delivered FedEx 767 showed, I believe, what was an old FedEx 727. Those photos are displayed because we're only matching by registration. We're not matching by anything else besides registration. So what you're seeing is the latest photo for that particular registration. When we get a new photo for the right aircraft, that one will be displayed because it displays the latest photograph. So below the photograph, we have the route information. So the route information does not come from the aircraft. That is all being processed by us based on the call sign being matched to the flight number and that flight number being included in the route information. So when we get schedule information from airlines and other schedule providers, that information includes the flight number, and it includes the departure and arrival times, and it includes the route. The route does not come from the aircraft. That is why oftentimes for aircraft that might not be filing schedules, you will see either NA for both departure and arrival airports, or you'll see NA for the destination, because we don't know that destination, because we're not getting a schedule for the aircraft and the aircraft isn't broadcasting that information. If you hover over any of the airports and most of the things in the plane info box, if you hover over them, you'll get a little tooltip. So the tooltip for hovering over the IATA code, or for the origin or the destination, you'll see the name of the airport, its IATA code again, and the ICAO code. So the IATA code is the 3-letter code that most people associate with airports. It's usually has something to do with the name of the airport or a historical bit of information about the airport. So for Charles de Gaulle in Paris, CDG. For John F. Kennedy Airport in New York, JFK, Hong Kong Airport, HKG, things like that. Some airports have a bit more colorful history, like ORD in Chicago, based on the old Orchard Douglas Field. But most of those IATA codes are generally based on the name of the airport or the city in which they're located. The ICAO code is used by the airlines for route planning purposes. It's used by air traffic control. Air traffic controllers will be the first to tell you that IATA codes don't matter. It's only the 4-letter codes that matter to them. And those are designed and metered out by ICAO. So in the US, it's usually a K or a P followed by whatever the airport's IATA code is. In other parts of the world, it'll be very different based on the location identifier assigned to that particular region or country. So we have the origin on the left, the destination on the right, and this little icon in the middle will change based on the type of flight that's occurring. So when the aircraft is in level flight or airborne, you'll see a straight flying plane. When it's taking off, you'll see a plane ascending. When it's coming into land, you'll see a plane descending. So you can know kind of at a glance, without looking at anything else, the stage of flight. Beneath the airport codes, we have the city in which the airport is associated with. This isn't necessarily the location of the physical airport. It's the location identifier provided by IATA that says this airport serves this city. So for Charles de Gaulle Paris or DOH Doha, those are associated with that particular city area. There are certain airports, a lot of times airports aren't necessarily in the major city that they serve. For instance, Arlanda Airport is not actually in the city of Stockholm, but it's closely associated, and IATA associates the location place with Stockholm. Below the name of the location identifier, you'll see the time zone of the airport, and you'll see the time zone in which they are located offset from UTC, because we use UTC to measure everything, so we measure the offset from the UTCs. Everything is the same for the arrival airport as well. Same thing. Scheduled information is the information that we receive from our schedule providers via the airlines that say this is when the flight is scheduled to depart, this is when the flight is scheduled to arrive. You can choose in settings what type of time you'd like to see. You can either show the airport time, the local times to you, or you can choose the local UTC time. So there's 3 kind of different ways that you can display that. At the moment, I have it displaying the local time for each particular airport. The actual time is the actual time at which the aircraft left the ground. So 4:37 p.m. it left the ground, took off. And then the estimated time of arrival is the time that the wheels will touch down. Not necessarily arrive at the gate, but the time that the aircraft will arrive at the airport. Underneath that, we have a progress bar. of sorts. So you can choose the distance units that you'd like to receive. Right now I have it set to kilometers. And this aircraft departed Paris 405 kilometers ago and 33 minutes ago. And it has 4,570 kilometers left, and that's scheduled to take about 5 hours and 6 minutes more. So the progress bar will move obviously across the screen as we progress with the flight. More Q40 information. So this is one of the expandable bars that are within the plane info box. Anything you see in blue here, more Q40 information, recent A7 APJ flights, the speed and altitude graph, the data source, and my Flightradar24 travelers near the bottom. Anything you see in blue is expandable. Just hit anywhere on the bar, and that will give you more information. So for QR40, what we have is the logo for the aircraft on the right, the Great Circle distance between Paris and Doha. So that is the straight line on the globe that brings you between the two airports. Not necessarily the distance that the aircraft will travel today. It looks like out of Paris, they took off to the west. So it won't be as short as the Great Circle distance, but it'll be pretty close, and it gives us an idea of the direction of travel. Average flight time is the average flight time for this flight number over the past 30 days. So the average flight today, or the average flight time for this particular flight, 5 hours, 42 minutes. The arrival information is available for certain airlines and certain aircraft and certain airports, depending on whether or not we're receiving that information from our providers. And when we do, it will display the terminal information, the arrival gate, and the baggage belt that you can pick up your baggage at. If you click on more QR40 flights, that takes you out to our data pages, which can show you the history of this specific flight number for the past 7 days or 30 days or a year or 3 years, depending on your subscription level. And these are just easily collapsible, and you can just move on through. Recent A7 APJ flights takes you to a list of the most recent flights, and then just with the flight number, you can also click through and move out from this particular page over to the data pages. Then you can view as many flights as you'd like. You can also see additional information for the previous flights. So today's flight, or yesterday's flight, we've got scheduled departure, when it actually left, scheduled arrival, things like that. Or I'm sorry, this was the inbound flight to Paris. And then you can choose to select more info about this particular aircraft or about that particular flight. So if you were interested more in the inbound flight QR39, you could click this and then go see more information about that particular flight number. And then you can just close these out to get back to the standard plane info box. Underneath all of the information about the flight route, the timings, and the particular aircraft, we have information about the aircraft, this specific aircraft itself. So we have the aircraft type, we have the ICAO aircraft type code here, which is the code that you can use to use filters to follow just that specific type of aircraft. So we've talked about filters in past videos, and we can put a link down in the description to some of those videos that we've talked about filters in the past. But a filter allows you to view specific aircraft based on different parameters like the aircraft type, the aircraft registration, and various other ways to narrow down exactly what you're looking for. In this particular case, this is an Airbus A380, which uses all Airbus A380s use the ICAO type code A388 because this is an Airbus A380-800. The 900 was scheduled to be built eventually, but it never was. So all Airbus A380s are A388. The additional information here is the specific aircraft type code. So Airbus A380, we know that. 861, it's an Airbus A380-800, and the 61 for Airbus is indications about the engine type and the engine version. So with Airbus, the full type code is different from a Boeing type code. Let's see if we can find a Boeing aircraft here. So this is a Boeing aircraft from Asiana coming into Paris. And this aircraft type code is Boeing. It's a 777-200ER. And the 8E is a form that Boeing has since done away with, but they're ownership codes. So with Airbus, the type codes are about engines and engine versions. With Boeing, it's and on older aircraft, it's ownership information, who it was first delivered to. So let's go back to Qatar and stick with that. Looking quickly at the comments, how do you find aircraft ownership history? We actually keep aircraft ownership history on our jet photos catalog. So aircraft ownership history, if you want to go back and look and see who operated an aircraft previously, you can click on the jet photo and that will take you to the information page for that particular aircraft. And you can see the ownership information and you can see photos from when that aircraft was operated by different airlines. Is there a suggestion that we can put in a feature suggestion? Absolutely. Feel free to leave those in the comments. And you can also email us at support@fr24.com with any feature suggestions that you have. And absolutely, we love getting feature suggestions from our users, people that use the site, people that use the app. We absolutely love hearing what you would like to see, because that helps give us ideas. Oftentimes new features that we develop come initially from people who use the site on a regular basis and say, hey, we think that you could improve by doing this. And we absolutely want to see that. So below that information about the aircraft type is the registration. If you hover over that, you get a readout in the ICAO alphabet. The country of registration also is displayed in a flag, so you can get an at a glance where that particular aircraft is registered. A lot of times aircraft are registered in different countries from where they are operating or where the airline operates. Think of a lot of the aircraft registered to ITA Airways based in Italy. Those aircraft are often leased and they're registered for that particular line a lot of times in Ireland. So the flag will display based on where the country is registered versus the country of that particular airline. Let's pick a different aircraft. Pardon me. So we've got a 787 coming out. Normally what would be displayed here is the serial number for the particular aircraft and the age of the aircraft when known. So that's the age of the aircraft since first flight. Not displaying right now, which is kind of not helpful, but normally what you would see is the serial number from the manufacturer and the age of the aircraft. Again, recent flights for that particular aircraft. Now we come to some of the more interesting and aviation specific things. So the calibrated altitude, vertical speed, GPS altitude, and track are all being broadcast by the aircraft. So this data is coming up till now. A lot of the data is not necessarily coming from the aircraft. We're receiving the 24-bit address and mapping all of that information onto which aircraft it is, and then providing that information specifically from our database. Now we're getting into things that we're seeing that are coming directly from the aircraft via the ADS-B data. So the calibrated altitude is the altitude above mean sea level. So this isn't the altitude above the ground necessarily. It's the altitude of the aircraft, the calibrated altitude above mean sea level. So what that is displayed is its standard pressure. And so to unpack that, below a certain transition altitude, aircraft are given an altimeter value and plug that in so that they can tell how high in the air they are. Above a certain transition altitude, all the aircraft use standard pressure, because the point of the altitude is to have an agreed altitude so that all of the aircraft are operating based on the same information. ADS-B data is sent at standard pressure, so it's not the corrected altitude that aircraft are using below a certain transition altitude. In the US, it's often 18,000 feet. It can vary depending on the terrain and the certain local issues, but generally speaking, below a certain level, they're using a corrected altitude. Above that, everything is reported in standard pressure, which is what the ADS-B standard does. It reports it in standard pressure. So this particular aircraft is traveling at flight level 370 or 37,000 feet. Since it's in level flight, its vertical speed is 0 feet per minute. And you can see on the tooltip that it shows different units of measurement based on whether or not you're hovering over the icon. So negative 64 feet per minute is what you are seeing from the vertical speed of the aircraft, because the ADS-B standard reports vertical speed in measures of 8. And so what that shows is 0 will show 0. And then it uses a function of values of 8. So you'll see 64, 128. You'll see other values that are based on 8 because of the way the ADS-B data is structured to conserve resources and the way the messages are sent. Altitude is sent in values of 25. So 0, 25, 50, 75, and so on. So you'll always see the ADS-B altitude values sent as a model of 25. The GPS altitude is also sent directly from the aircraft, and that is not based on barometric altitude, but the altitude that the aircraft is receiving from its GPS receivers, based on an ellipsoid of the Earth. So none of these are based on above ground level. These are all based on kind of international agreed upon standards. Mean sea level means the mean level of the sea all over the world. And then the GPS altitude is based on an ellipsoid, which has been developed that shows the plane of the Earth based on where the GPS receivers are. So this altitude and the calibrated altitude can often differ because they're not calculated from the same base. The track of the aircraft is 1 through 360 based on the direction of travel, the track of the aircraft. So it's not necessarily the heading where it's pointed, because the wind can change that. It's the track of travel in the direction. The speed and altitude graph is hidden by default, and then can be displayed for users when you have you can do playback and things like that. So let's go over to so this aircraft is climbing, so you can see the vertical speed increasing and the calibrated altitude increasing as well. The speed and altitude graph is exactly what it says. It's showing the altitude of the aircraft from the calibrated altitude, not the GPS altitude, and the ground speed of the aircraft. And you can pop this out and move it around the screen as you'd like, so that you can see kind of where the aircraft was at a certain point in time, how fast it was going, and how high in the air it was. If you want to look at a particular area, you can zoom in and show that particular area where the speed leveled off, but the aircraft continued to climb, and then the speed increased and the aircraft climbed even further. Reset zoom brings you back to the whole flight. Xing out here returns the altitude and ground speed into the plane info box. Underneath the speed and altitude graph, we have a variety of speeds. So part of the information that we get from each aircraft as far as the ADS-B data concerned is the ground speed. That comes from every single aircraft. All aircraft are broadcasting their ground speed, and that's displayed for all aircraft. True airspeed, indicated airspeed, and the Mach value are transmitted from specific aircraft based on whether or not local air traffic control is interrogating that from the transponder. If local air traffic control is not asking for that information, the aircraft won't send it and we won't be able to see it. So right now we're only getting certain values from the aircraft. And you'll see the true airspeed, the indicated airspeed, and the Mach values are very different because they measure different things. Most of the aircraft that are flying are using their indicated airspeed as their value that they're operating from at the moment as they climb out, and then they'll switch over to a Mach value into cruise so that they can understand how fast they're going relative to the air around it. We won't get into what all of the speeds mean today. That's a separate video that we'll do later on, and we have a blog post already on what those various speeds measure and what they mean and how they're used. So we can link to that later as well. The wind and temperature information comes from the aircraft as well and is only sent again when it's being requested from ground-based air traffic controllers and their interrogation of the transponder. So the transponder will take the information that's being asked of it and just send it out. The wind information provides the wind speed and direction, and then the temperature information is obviously the outside aircraft temperature. We don't get temperature values for inside the aircraft, but we just assume they're comfortable. We have underneath the wind and temperature values, the FIR UIR. So the FIR UIR is the flight information region, which encompasses the area of air traffic control responsibility. And we also have the UIR, which is the upper region. And that is where aircraft are flying and what region of air traffic control responsibility there is. From there, we can see who's controlling that particular flight. This particular, let's see, these aircraft are operating in France at the moment, so the UIR is not displaying. Let's come over here and we can see some of these aircraft. So this aircraft is operating in the Warsaw area of control. And these are all broken down. Some UIRs and FIRs are just country specific, and then some are based on the area in which they are based, smaller than a country. To close things out, we've got the data source. So data source ADSB, this tells you what data source the aircraft is broadcasting. So you'll be able to see where the aircraft is sending its data. It's either ADSB or MLAT. It could be radar data, depending on where the aircraft is, or it could be satellite data. So we've got aircraft that are operating with blue icons are broadcasting their ADSB data, and we're receiving that via satellite. So the ICAO code down here is the unique identifier for the aircraft, the 24-bit address. Each aircraft broadcasts a unique ICAO 24-bit address. That is how we understand what the registration of the aircraft is, and then base all of our extrapolation on the data for who the aircraft is registered to, the serial number, the aircraft type, everything like that comes from our database. But we first take what ICAO 24-bit address that aircraft is broadcasting. The squawk over here is a 4-digit octal code that is based on what the air traffic controllers have assigned this specific flight. So air traffic control will say squawk and then give a 4-digit number. And that is how the air traffic controllers are identifying the aircraft on their screen. Latitude and longitude are exactly what they say they are. It's the latitude and longitude that the aircraft is currently at, the last position broadcast that we've received, and that, of course, will change as the aircraft moves through. And then finally down this last blue bar down here, you'll see my Flightradar24 travelers. For a cargo aircraft, there aren't going to be any travelers, but for a commercial aircraft carrying passengers, you're more likely to see who using My Flightradar24, which is where you can track your flights and log all of the flights that you've taken. If you've flown on a flight and you've decided to have a public flight, you can do that and show that as well. So nobody on this flight either. We'll have to find one that people have been on before. And the very bottom row, the last thing we have is 3D view. 3D view will show you a 3D model of the aircraft moving through the air over the terrain. I'm not going to show that right now. Route will be, because we'll cover 3D view in a separate video. Route shows you the entire route of the entire aircraft, and follow brings you back and centers that particular aircraft and keeps you centered over that aircraft as it moves over the map. Share allows you to share the flight with people that you'd like, and then more allows you to learn a little bit about the aircraft that you've already seen in the plane info box, but it gives it in a little bit more of a relief image, so that you can finally see what's in this at a glance. Or you can add it to your custom fleet if you are doing custom fleet. And then you can hide other aircraft, which is similar to the route information, but it will just show that particular aircraft. Going back to the top, one thing I failed to mention at the beginning is you can bookmark a flight or an aircraft directly after following it. So click the star, and then you can add either the flight or the aircraft registration to your bookmarks if you want to follow that flight on a regular basis. And that'll be, so we'll add this aircraft to our bookmarks, and then it'll be over here in our bookmarks down here. So that is the plane info box. I hope this has been helpful as we've walked through all of the information that's here, where the information comes from, and things like that. After, if you want to send us suggestions, please do so. Leave things in the comments, and we'll answer those questions as we see them. And you can always email us at support@fr24.com, or you can find us on Twitter or Facebook and leave a comment there, and absolutely let us know what you want to see more of as far as live streaming, or if you have any questions about Flightradar24 whatsoever. I'm Ian Petchnick, and I hope that you've learned a little bit about Flightradar24 today, and happy tracking.